In this position, white played queen to d2, blundering a forced mate in 2 moves. You would assume white was a beginner, but this was actually Magnus Carlsen, the highest rated player in history. Today we're breaking down why elite players fall into these exact blind spots, what you can do to avoid them, and why traditional puzzles on chess.com are not fixing your blunders. A lot of chess players make the mistake of trusting the engine too much and taking everything that the engine says at face value without actually understanding the position. And I think this is a huge mistake, but it's a very common mistake that people make. And what I teach my students is something a little bit different. What I teach them is to think in terms of problems and solutions. So what does this mean? What are the problems and what are the solutions? So let me give you an example. This position is from the World Championship match in 2021 between Magnus Carlsen and Jan Nepomniachtchi, the legendary Game 6. And in this position, the correct move or the correct idea was to play either Queen B1 or Queen C2, because this way you're able to give some checks on this diagonal and you're actually able to tie down this king somewhat to the defense of this knight, so white is unable to make progress. However, humans are not computers, and in this position, Jan Nepomniachtchi played queen to e6. So if we look at this position, what is the problem for the black side? The problem is that these pawns are going up the board, and if one of these pawns becomes a queen, then black is going to lose. And the only solution to that in this position is to give perpetual checks. You don't have any other solution with the black pieces. You cannot checkmate the white king. That is going to be impossible. In this position, Jan Nepomniachtchi played queen to e6. Of course, he definitely knew that the problem in this position was that these pawns are going up the board and black is trying to give perpetual checks, but he missed a defensive resource, which is king to h4, or actually king to g4. They both work. And now what happens is that Magnus advances, and then Magnus puts the knight on g7, which is very important because now this king can slide all over the place and it can actually hide on g8. Actually, Jan Nepomniachtchi resigned in this exact position because he saw this sequence of moves right here. So there are these problems and there are solutions to those problems, and these are the things that you have to catch if you want to become a strong player. Now, how does this apply to your games? Let's say we have a position in the Italian. So I'm going to show you a very, very common opening, the Italian. This is actually the most common opening in chess, and this is a very, very common variation that black plays in these positions. And there's actually a very interesting problem that white has in this position, and that problem is the fact that black can play knight to a5. So if you play very natural moves, such as, for example, rook to e1 or knight to d2 or knight to c3, all of these are bad moves for the same exact reason, and that reason is knight to a5. So this is the problem that white is facing, the fact that black is going to exchange this very nice Italian bishop. He's going to exchange his knight for this very nice Italian bishop, and black is basically going to get the bishop pair, and if something like this happens, maybe the pawn on b3 becomes a target, and this is a very pleasant position for the black pieces. So going back, the best moves in this position, there are a couple of options that white has. White has either a3 or a4. Of course, both of these moves create a getaway square for the bishop. There's also this move c3, which creates a getaway square on c2. So for example, if the same sequence is played, the bishop goes to c2 and the bishop gets away. But if I were to go back here, a very natural move, which is also a developing move, knight c3 is wrong. Knight d2, wrong. Rook e1, wrong. Bishop g5, wrong. You get the gist. All of these moves are completely wrong. And even though they're not necessarily blunders, but they are huge mistakes, huge positional errors made by the white pieces. So whenever you are learning a new opening or whenever you're analyzing a game, try to identify what are the problems in the position and what are the solutions to those problems. If you understand that, then you're going to be able to punish moves like knight to c3 basically immediately. And it's crazy to say that knight c3 is a bad move because it looks like such a natural move. And also, if you're from the defensive side and you understand what your opponent wants to do and what are the problems for you, in that case, you will know how to respond appropriately. So this is sort of a mindset shift when you're analyzing or learning a new opening that will allow you to catch these types of details. And once you understand these details, then you're able to use them effectively from both sides, both attacking and the defending side. Now I want to briefly talk about why puzzles are not really that effective for reducing blunders. And this is actually just a random puzzle that I found on Lichess. If you want to solve it, you can pause the video. But the solution here is this move queen to g8. And then I'm going to show you what the solution is. This is basically the solution. I don't want to go through this whole thing because it's not really the point of what I'm trying to say. So this is the solution right here. Rook d5, rook f5, and the black king is checkmated. So the whole puzzle was just a checkmate in 6 moves. Now what you have to remember is that this is a very niche pattern that you're not going to see in a lot of your games. For example, let's say you play the ready opening, or this can be applied to any opening, but let's say you play this, for example. If you play this opening, the tactic that I just showed you, this tactic right here, is not going to happen. It's never going to happen. So what you do during puzzles oftentimes is not really applicable in your games because the patterns that you see in puzzles most of the time are not the same patterns that you will see in your games. It's like going to the gym. Let's say you go to the gym and you want to grow your biceps. You want to train your biceps. If you want to train your biceps, you're not going to do squats. It would make no sense. You're training different muscles. And this is kind of the same way. You're training patterns that are not relevant to the actual games that you're playing. Now this applies to chess.com and Lichess puzzles. Now there might be some book puzzles that are very thematic and that actually apply to the positions that you're playing. In that case, it's different. In that case, puzzles are actually very good. But if you're spamming chess.com and Lichess puzzles thinking that that will make your ready opening better, or your Italian better, or your Queen's Gambit better, you are extremely wrong. Those things don't actually help when it comes to reducing blunders in your games because those are different tactical patterns than what actually happens in your game. So if that's the case, then how are we supposed to blunder less? What are we supposed to do in order to make less blunders? And that is exactly what I'm about to tell you next. The best way to reduce blunders in your games is to actually subscribe to the Critical Chess channel. But the second best way to reduce blunders in your games is to improve your positional understanding. And some of you might go crazy right now. You're like, what? I thought that when I blunder, I was supposed to do more tactics, just more and more tactics, and then I will eventually stop blundering. That's not really the case, and let me show you why. So this is actually a position that I was shown by my own student, and the first move that I thought of in this position was actually the correct move. It was this move, bishop to h6. This is the correct move. It attacks the knight, and you're trying to take the knight, double your opponent's pawns, and also take the pawn on h3. Then my student suggested this move, pawn to g5, and I was a bit hesitant, but I said it was okay, but I was wrong about this. This is actually not okay, because what I initially thought is that the knight goes back and I take the pawn on h3. But the knight actually goes to h5, and if you take on h3, your queen actually gets trapped. So you can't take this pawn, and now if you can't take this pawn, then g5 makes no sense because it just weakens the light squares even more, and you have a dark square bishop. So what are we doing placing pawns on dark square bishops? So this move right here, g5, is actually wrong. But if I was playing this position in a real game, I would not have played g5. I would have played bishop to h6. This was my first intuition. And this is the point that I'm trying to make. If you are able to improve your positional understanding, if you get better at positional play, and if you get better at making better positional decisions, you're going to be in less situations where you might make a blunder. So you're naturally going to be in less of those scenarios where you can make these types of mistakes. I know this just blew your mind. This is crazy. This is like blasphemy. How dare you? If I want to reduce my blunders and if I want to blunder less, I'm supposed to do more puzzles. But that's not the case. You actually have to improve your positional understanding. That way you will get better positions, and that way your opponent will have less opportunities to get tactical shots on you. Because people usually look at the blunder that they made, but they don't really look at the positions and the moves that led up to that blunder. They don't look at g5 and they don't understand why it's such a bad move. They only look at this move, queen takes h3, and they blame this move. But the problem is, if you had never played g5, this never would have happened, now would it? So that's why positional play matters a lot, because you are going to be blundering less because you will have better positions. But now the question becomes, okay, how do we get better at positional chess? And this is a very nuanced question, and it's not something that you're gonna be able to learn in one day. But if you want to get better at positional chess, if you want to get better at coming up with plans and making better positional choices, then watch the video that's on the screen right now. That will help you come up with better candidate moves, and that will help you blunder significantly less.